How are you? And thank you so much again for having me on your show. Always great to be on your My Body is My Temple.
Right, thank you. And yes, I just played that song on It's My Life because isn't it, when you take control of it, and so important that we contribute to every part of our body by using the right language, by looking at self-healing. And so we're going to be as we're going to be talking about self-healing. Self-healing, using your own resources to help you get that feel-good factor. Yes? So,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about what cognitive therapy is, and then we will then discuss as to how we can use our own resources to generate that feeling of wellness.
Yes, so cognitive behavioral therapy, for those that don't know, it's also known as CBT. So it's a psychological therapy which is used widely and part of the guidance that we follow as doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists, the NICE guidance and National Institute of Clinical Excellence. We recommend it for lots of different mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, OCD, panic attacks, PTSD. So there's so many conditions in which in which CBT can help for all these conditions. So looking at CBT and what it stands for, so it's an acronym for cognitive behavioral therapy, which means it looks at our thinkings, how it affects our feelings and our behaviors. So that is what it actually, in essence, means. And I can explain that more in detail.
Do because I know that it's something that the NHS recommends in terms of psychological or talk therapy. And a lot of individuals may not actually realise that's what it's, that it's dealing with how we use our mind to change our behaviour.
Exactly. So you've summed it up really well, Valma. So that's really a good way to understand it. So it is usually on the NHS. You can have CBT, or you can have it through your GP through the IAPT, which is the Intense Access to Psychological Therapies, or you can get CBT privately. And there's online services as well, like iCBT. But in essence, so what I was trying to say is that it looks at our thinking and how whatever we think, those thoughts, those cognitions, sometimes they can be quite negative, quite distressing, and how by actually changing the way we think, it will actually eventually change our behaviors and our feelings and the physical symptoms we experience with different mental health conditions. And I'll use an example if that's okay with you. So we'll take a simple example like depression. So if someone is experiencing negative thoughts, they're feeling quite down, low, and they quite negative about the future. So they have feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, and they don't see that there's any future. And they really extremely dark mode where they only have negative thoughts and constant negative thoughts that they keep on ruminating. So what happens is, so that's our cognitions that we would have. And how it affects our behavior is what happens with people with depression, as we know, and we've spoken about it, Valma, and you know quite well, is people will start the behaviors, they will start isolating themselves, they will lose motivation, they'll stay in bed, they won't take care of themselves. So how the thinking then affects the behavior is a classic example in that. And then the feelings and the physical symptoms that then occur as a result of it is that the feelings are they start to feel really, really down. They might become tearful and they might start having thoughts that they want to end life. And then the physical symptoms, some people with depression, because they're not taking care of themselves, they might either increase in their weight or lose weight. And it can affect them physically, and they can have some anxiety symptoms. coexisting with panic symptoms.
When we, because last week we talked about the signs and symptoms of depression and so forth, but but today we want to sort of focus on, okay, if we have what can we actually do in terms of our self healing? What are those things we can do in terms of negative thinking and positive thinking? What's the difference? How does being positive in thought and communication help towards healing? Because there is research that has indicated that the way we self-talk can influence our recovery. I mean, there's research in terms of, when I was doing my master's in psychological health and well-being, we looked at research in terms of people who were suffering from cancer or depression, and the way that they were engaged in positive thinking and attitude actually helped them to recover, and it had some impact on their wellness and well-being and recovery.
And absolutely, that is such lovely examples, Valma. And it sounds like you've done your research. There is definitely evidence to show that positive thinking, the power of our words, our speech, and our actions can help change our situations. And specifically in people who have depression, or they're extremely anxious and they might be suicidal, they might have a lot of like other symptoms like OCD or panic symptoms, they might have eating disorders. So what happens in these conditions is our thinking is affected, and by changing it from a more negative state, which is what you were trying to explain to us, to a more positive way of thinking, what the evidence shows is that this can actually change and help people improve in their symptoms. And that, in essence, is what CBT is. So when you see a therapist, so usually for CBT, you start to see a therapist weekly for about 50 minutes to an hour, and up to 12 to 16 sessions or longer as agreed by you and the therapist. And in those sessions, the therapist will go through the hot cross bun diagram that we have of our cognition, our thinking, our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, and the physical symptoms. So they'll go through this, and what will happen, and you can keep a diary of how you are thinking. What does that thinking lead to in terms of behavior, in terms of physical symptoms, and in terms of your feelings? And what people start to see is there's a pattern. So then what we start to do as therapists and as psychiatrists and anyone that's trained in counseling is they will try and identify and help the person to become their own therapist. So to do your own self CBT. So basically self healing, as you said, Valma. So what they will try to do is, so for example, if someone's feeling really down or they have a negative thought about the way they view their body, so the therapist will start to looking at that thought and changing it from a negative to a positive. So maybe look at all the positives that are in their life as opposed to the negative things, and also then focus on, so if a person has a negative view of their body, they might look at the positive things about their body and start appreciating their body. And when you start to shift your focus from negative thinking to more positive, it will then affect the way you are feeling, the behaviors, and also the physical symptoms. And eventually, what happens is you become your own therapist. So you start challenging those thoughts. For example, if I'm thinking, oh, I'm really fat, and the therapist might try and explain to me, but look at all the other, this is what you're thinking, but what is the evidence for it? Is there any evidence for it? Or if I'm saying, oh, I've got no friends, or I'm feeling really down and lonely, the therapist will try and shift your focus to think about, okay, but you've got a job, you've you're qualified, you've got an education, you're in a relationship, and you've got friends and family that love and support you. So by changing and challenging these thoughts and moving it and shifting it, changing our mindset from negative to positive, eventually what happens is the behaviors will be that the person will start appreciating, start showing more gratitude for, for whatever they have, and they will start to be more motivated to do things as opposed to not being motivated. And as a result of that, their feelings, they feel a lot happier, and the physical symptoms disappear. So the symptoms of anxiety or the butterflies in the tummy. So there's different ways in which we can actually teach people. So in terms of self CBT, so one of the ways is shifting the thinking, as I said. The second thing is challenging what is the evidence for whatever I'm thinking. So even for a person with OCD, they think that there's germs on their hands, and they don't want to, then they want to wash their hands repeatedly, like 30 to 40 times. So the therapist will then they can do the cognitive part or the behavioral part, which we can talk about later. But again, it's about challenging and shifting your mindset and moving from negative thinking to more positive thinking. And there's so much of evidence to show that this works. I personally have done CBT for other people because as psychiatrists, we train in psychotherapy as well, and we have our training. So I have delivered it as well, and I've seen tremendous results with just a few sessions of CBT. So it's definitely something, and the evidence, according to the NICE guidance, which I was talking about earlier, is for a lot of the conditions: depression, anxiety, panic, OCD, eating disorders, lots of these conditions, a combination, according to the NICE guidance, of CBT or psychological therapies or talk therapy with medication is highly beneficial. So there's a lot of studies done on this.
Okay. Right. Can I just interrupt you there? Because I'm just thinking to myself, okay, we're talking about self-healing, and we're talking about the diagnosis as well in terms of recognizing those signs and symptoms.
Yes.
Law is, what analogy can we use? Because I often use, when I'm giving a talk or and trying to help individuals to develop their self-confidence, I use a plant where the plant, has lost its feeling of moving on, laughter,
Yes.
happy. And then I say to an individual, just think of a plant coming out of the earth, coming up, growing. And that's where your confidence and your feeling of self-worth can come from. Think of a plant that's growing. There's a seed, and all of a sudden you see the bud coming up, and then you see the flower. It's like a daffodil yes. coming up, and you see it, and the bud opens up, and there's the flower. So how can one or an individual think of something that will give them that life, that I love me, and I love to be here, I love to be around, and I'm good enough to be here? What analogy, what something can they use to help them to think, change that negative feeling to a positive feeling? We talk about visualization in terms of, we say to some clients, think of yourself, of an area, of a place or a thing that made you laugh, or a place you visited, like the seaside. I remember a good thought. How can we encourage individuals who don't feel that confident to bring this, what they are given, the joy of being here, having things around them? What can we give them? What can they take to help them to switch from being negative to being positive?
There's so much, Valma, and I absolutely love the flower analogy. I think that is so apt, and especially, showing how when a plant is withered and wilting, and by just giving it some nourishment, some self-care, some water, sunshine, then the flowers bloom and the daffodil comes out, and the plant lives and thrives. So it's very similar with us. We need to, there's so many things we can think of. I think the visualization is exactly was my response, and I'm so glad you said it first, because I think what we need to realize, and I think when people are going through dark moments or dark clouds and difficult, challenging times or obstacles in their life, I think what happens is we end up feeling so down that you can't pick yourself up. And I think what people need to realize first foremostly is that this too will pass. And the way in which they need to think about things is that whatever they're going through is only temporary. And they can get back to the way they were before. So, visualization and using relaxation exercise, meditation, and mindfulness are key in thinking about visualizing yourself being happy and well and going back to that state where you were before. So I think that's really important, and I think that that feeling of well-being and hope and recovery, a person needs to have that as well, and to realize, as I said, it's only temporary. So I think in terms of other sort of things that people can do to sort of analyze this and to sort of get them from where they are, I think it's about the mindset. Your mindset needs to shift, because I know, Valma, I'm sure when you've spoken to people in these situations with depression, anxiety, OCD, panic, they're quite negative, and it seems like they're stuck in a rut, and it seems to be like a vicious cycle.
That's
Keeps
true. Yes. Yes. For
Yes,
some people. Yes.
exactly. So it's about breaking that cycle, and that is why CBT is key. So as much as having an analogy and visualizing yourself really well, and I'm good enough, and having all those positive affirmations about yourself and the future, I think it's also about changing your thinking, because I think we need to go to the root of the problem. And the root of a lot of these conditions is the way people are thinking or perceiving situations. And I'm not saying people are not going through difficult, challenging times. Lots of people are, but it's about being in the moment and about interpreting those situations as temporary and then moving on. So looking at CBT works, talking therapy, because it's looking at your thinking and trying to change that from a negative to a positive, and therefore our mindset is key. So if there's any analogy or anything that people need to take home today, is your mindset. You need to believe and trust that you will get better, and that you will overcome whatever challenges and difficulties and mental health problems that you are going through, whether it's related to you or your loved one or someone else around you. And we also need to then think about, building our resilience. I think resilience is key in all these conditions, and that's what we're talking about, and being optimistic. So, whilst people are going through difficult times, it can be really challenging. But I think if they have that little bit of that glimmer of hope that they will get better, they can get back to the state they were before, or they can pick up from what they're going through, then I think that's really helpful.
I'm just thinking also here because historically, individuals were fearful of being labelled as having mental health. And I'm just thinking to myself, does the term mental health still needs to be seen in this light of disease, or is because the way we're thinking now and the way we are living, do you think the term mental health still needs to be used? Is it rather about thinking about mental health in a different way? Because although we're trying to overcome the stigma and labeling of mental health, and because of this, this condition that's coming within our society, and everywhere we're hearing about mental health, do we need to change the language?
I think so. I'm fortunate that when I started my career very early on, I started to do research on stigma of mental health. And to be honest, in 2022, I'm so pleased, Valma. I don't know about you as a mental health professional, but I'm so pleased that we can openly talk about mental health conditions, and we can actually normalize it. We've seen Oprah, we've seen Prince and William, isn't it? Yeah, he's been working um, with Oprah Winfrey. We've seen stars like Lady Gaga, and all these other people come out about with talking openly about mental health conditions, and we're starting to normalize it. So in one sense, I understand in terms of your idea about thinking about moving away from saying mental health, but on the other hand, as a doctor and psychiatrist, we have criteria and we diagnose people with mental health conditions, and then we have certain treatment, holistic treatments like medication, psychology, and social aspects of care that we have available to treat it. So it's like diabetes. If we didn't term it diabetes, then how would we know someone's got diabetes according to the criteria, and then how to treat it? So it's very similar. So I would say if we did not have those terms, it would be very blind, because personally, me as a doctor and psychiatrist, if someone's coming to me, I want to know exactly what they're going through. I want to try and be able to get a diagnosis, and helpful diagnosis in terms of getting them the right treatment at that moment in time. And therefore, I would want to know, is this person experiencing depression or anxiety, panic disorder, eating disorders, addiction disorders, dementia? How am I going to be able to treat them if I don't know what's going on? So on one hand, we do need the diagnoses so we can treat them appropriately and get them onto the road of well-being and recovery, which is what we want to do.
On the other hand, I would argue that with this particular condition in the community that we have, there's a different level of mental health to the one that is diagnostically diagnosed.
Yes, so there's varying types. So I think a lot of probably what you're trying to say is that people can just present with stress, vulnerability, and then later on it then becomes, when does it become an illness? So they can just start with stress, acute adjustment reaction, acute stress reaction, just having sort of some difficulties or vulnerabilities or acopia, and then later on it then develops into a full-blown condition of mental illness. But to be honest, what I want to say is, it's okay not to be okay. And as a psychiatrist, I feel so passionate. As I said, I've started talking about stigma from a very, very early onset in my career. And my global aim is to reduce stigma and raise awareness about mental health conditions. And that's my passion. That's something that I've made a goal in my life and my career, to help other people, and to get other like-minded people to do the same wherever they are, because we all at some point in our life have gone through difficulties. I've gone through grief, and I've spoken about it openly when I lost my mom in 2020 in May, and I understood what people were going through. So as much as I'm really resilient, and I'm probably one of the happiest people on the planet right now, and I want to help as many people as I want.
So coming back, okay, Seshni, so coming back to the perspective on self-healing.
Yes.
Therefore, in terms of the globalization
Yeah.
of this feeling of not being in control, because that in itself can cause people to be under stress, not being in control of your body, not being in control of your decisions, not being because of what's happening. So by coming back to our self-healing, taking time to reflect on ourselves, taking time to nurture ourselves, taking time to Yes, I'm here. I am grateful to be here. And I will do my best to live in this world that's throwing these things at us, And we have to adjust, our bodies have to adjust to accommodate what's happening.
I love that. And I think it's so true what you're saying. So it's all about changing our thinking from negative to positive, to being more optimistic. It's about looking at our self-healing and self-care, looking at our emotional toolbox and building resilience. So whether it's just going for walks, just being in nature, grounding ourselves, showing gratitude, being kind, showing compassion, sharing our difficulties with other people that will be able to listen to us, and then practicing like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, exercise, eating healthy and well, and also then, if you need any further support, seeking advice from healthcare professionals, mental health services, people that are trained in these conditions, or even charity organizations. So people need to realize when they're going through these difficulties that there is help. There is someone. You just need to ask for help, and you need to believe that you will be able to get better. And I think that's what you've said today, Valma. It's about self-healing. It's about self-care. And we need to be more aware and in tune with our body. And that's why practicing mindfulness, I've spoken about Power of Now. It's a very good book if anyone wants to read it, by Eckhart Tolle. And practicing mindfulness is key. And that's what he talks about. Because the only moment you have is a present moment. People get caught up in the monkey mind, and that's why we end up having all these mental health conditions and anxiety symptoms. But practicing mindfulness and being present with all five senses, and becoming aware when you're getting stressed, and then taking time out to rest. Rest is even so important. Listening to music, drinking enough water, and laughter, as you mentioned. Laughter is the best medicine. So putting on some comedies and just laughing.
Yeah, I do agree with you. And look, I just again would like to thank you for coming on to share your perspective on self-healing, because at the end of the day, it's our body, it's our temple, and it's a gift, and we have to look after it.
Fantastic.
And so having that compassion and empathy for yourself, but also for others, is part of that journey. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. And I hope our listeners were able to grab some wisdom, pearls of wisdom from the both of us. And definitely, if anyone needs further advice, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So Seshni Mudlia, or Dr. Seshni Mudlia, Happiness Psychiatrist, or the Happy Doctor's Kitchen. And namaste. Thank you for all that you are doing to raise awareness, and thank you for having me on your fabulous show. My body is my temple.
You have a great day with your family, and thank you. And let us play some music now, because music is the soul to the heart and the healing mechanism for all of us.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Valma.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, that was Dr. Seshni Mudlaya, a very close colleague of mine, who helps me to inspire and create awareness about how we can look after our health. Your body is your temple. I'm Valma at Hospital Radio Bedford, and the time now is just gone 8 minutes past 1. And take time, listen to your body. Feel that vibration. Feel the energy that's within you. Create that energy. Take time. Your body is your temple.
Thank you, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed that talk with Hospital Radio Bedford with Valma James, a very close colleague, and on her show, really worth listening on Hospital Radio Bedford. My body is my temple. So anyone wants any further advice, to contact me, and have a fantastic weekend. Lots of love from me to you. Namaste.